Support for this podcast comes from the patrons at patreon.com/FMLFPL. Okay, welcome to another FMLFPL Fireside Chat. I'm pleased to welcome for the second time Mike Goodman of CBS Sports and the Double Pivot podcast. What's up, Mike?
Hey, I believe this is the first time I am Mike Goodman of CBS Sports on the podcast, though.
Second time Mike Goodman, first time CBS Sports, yeah. Formerly Stats Bomb, I think, was last time you were on.
Stats Bomb, I was at ESPN, I was at Grantland, I wrote for The Ring, I've been all over the place. But now I'm sort of settled at CBS Sports.
Nice. AKA Paramount Plus, which all
that
of
is
our
right.
American...
Paramount Plus, where you can watch all of your Champions League soccer, all of your NWSL, all of your Argentinian and Brazilian. We have rights coming out everywhere. CONCACAF stuff. I've done my professional duty.
If there was only one giant Super League that had all the best teams in the world, we could just all be in one place. It'd be perfect. So let's talk about the Super League.
Come to the point.
Yeah, I was just saying to you before we started, a year of COVID, that wasn't enough. The billionaire Bond villains that run football basically had to drop a bomb on everyone with their secret meeting of a Super League. And I feel obligated to talk about it. So just, most people listening to this podcast generally know what's going on. They follow football. They play fantasy probably if they listen to us. But what's going on? Who wants the Super League, and why do they want it?
So the basics are this: 12 teams from England, Spain, and Italy announced their plans to break away and form a Super League. The Super League would basically have been a replacement for the Champions League. It would have played midweek between weekend games. The team said, we want to stay in our domestic leagues, but we want this new Super League additionally. And what made it different from the Champions League is that these 12 teams said, okay, we are always going to be in it. We don't have to qualify for it every year. We don't have to do well enough in our domestic leagues. Every year, us 12 and 3 other teams who we add in, so 15 teams, we are the Super League. We exist. And then there will be 5 other teams that qualify through whatever manner, and that's the 20-team league every year. And it's a big difference from how European soccer is operated. Like, the idea that you don't have to qualify for the equivalent of a Champions League is a total change from even if it's not practically different for several of these teams, it is sort of theoretically, philosophically, emotionally, a very different idea that you are automatically in this Super League. And so that was kind of the biggest breaking point. There's a lot of other stuff going on here in terms of who's getting money and how much, and who has control over the league and the TV rights and all this stuff. But the bottom line here, is that these 12 teams wanted to create a world where they plus 3 others were just sitting at the top of European soccer, no matter what, forever.
And we saw, aside from the fans, we even heard Klopp was saying he likes a world where West Ham can make the Champions League, and Pep was saying you need the competitiveness to get in. Everyone kind of was against it.
And I'll be honest, So because I'm an American and because I grew up with American sports, I am fully comfortable with the idea that you can have effective competitive leagues that don't have promotion and relegation. It can work. So clearly it can work. All these managers and players are saying this, and I understand where they're coming from because it's all they've known. Yeah. But to me, the biggest issue is less that a league without relegation can't work, and more what happens to everybody else. When you form a Super League at the top, you have 15 teams that thrive, and everybody else is really cut off from this. So what happens to your West Hams of the world when there isn't your Leicesters of the world, when there is your Atalantas, when there isn't this theoretical possibility at the very least of this competitiveness? And that, to me, is this giant issue sort of with the health of the game.
Because
go ahead.
I was just going to say, as of now, I think there's a general sense that there is a ladder that can be climbed by theoretically any team, no matter how low you are in your domestic league. You could always get bought out and get good players and climb and
that
win.
That is certainly the story that we all tell ourselves about
that's
soccer.
the fairy tale that's sold.
The degree to which that is true, I don't know. But like, I would also say that like, if you're a fan of like a League One team, like a third division team, like the joy that you get from that fandom, like your experience, I don't really think is pinned to the hopes of like eventually qualifying for the Champions League.
Right.
But like, there are other like practical implications here. Like, if you have this Super League, and if it goes for major TV rights, and this is what everybody wants to watch,
right?
Like, everything else starts to wither on the vine. Like, why is my employer paying lots of money for Champions League if Super League exists? Why is my employer paying lots of money for Serie A rights if Super League exists? Because people are just the assumption is that people will want to watch Super League, will watch Super League, and will not watch any of these other leagues. So you combine that all around, and what it shows you is to a real degree, this is like close to an extinction level event for a lot of the non-Super League leagues, the non-Super League teams. Like,
it's basically bad for absolutely everyone except for the teams that are automatically in. It's bad for even the players, right? I mean, there's wage suppression.
So that is an interesting part of this, right? Is that a big advertised part of the Super League was we want to keep wages down to 55% of revenue, which is. That's a high number compared to American sports.
It sounds like a ton. Like, if you told me that and I didn't read any of the financial articles, I'd be like, oh my God, players are going to be rich. Right.
It's a high number compared to American sports too. It is a low number compared to top level soccer. Where the numbers, except in the Bundesliga, where they really have sort of brought costs down. But everywhere else, the wage percentage is higher than that. Again, because of like how the structure of soccer is set up with buying and selling players and like not having. If you can get relegated, it makes sense to invest in a player who you can sell if you are relegated. If you put that money into other things, if you start construction of a new stadium, if you, bolster your advertising budget with like commitments and you get relegated, like, those are not things you can adjust on the fly. Whereas, like, you can sell a player. So it is that structure and that tendency which pushes wages up in world soccer in a way that it doesn't in American sports. So once you have a Super League, that dynamic changes because you can't get relegated. So, like, it's not a huge deal if teams are, like, tied into stadium renovations and finish last in the league, right? Because those 15 teams, they're still there. They're still getting that TV deal stuff.
So then I guess my follow-up is, what are the obvious problems with the current systems that these teams feel the need to break away? What are the problems for the small clubs, and what are the small group of super clubs, I should say, and what are the problems for the thousands of smaller clubs?
So there's 2 or 3 different things going on here. One is that what the big clubs feel is like, everybody wants to watch us and not you. Right. We drive the popularity of this sport. Right. Like, you look at the explosion of popularity in America. Is America teeming with Burnley fans? No, not really. They're
Probably
teeming with United fans and Arsenal fans, even when they're not super competitive. Like, these big teams are the ones that, they feel like they drive the popularity of the sport. They are the engine that is like bringing in money. They want more of the pie for themselves and for everybody else to subsist on less. Right. Smaller clubs, on the other hand, look around and say, well, not really in the Premier League. The Premier League, everybody's got a pretty sweet ride from the Premier League deal. Yeah. But elsewhere across Europe, everybody looks around and says, well, not enough of the money is flowing to us right now. We are getting left, even with the status quo, we are getting left behind. Solidarity payments, which is like, are too small. There's no revenue sharing.
By the English teams.
Well, the English teams and like the handful of big clubs.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So like your perennial Champions League sides, your Barcelonas, your Real Madrids, your Bayern Munichs, right? There's no such thing as revenue sharing in any of these leagues. Like, there's nothing that keeps the worst teams pinned to the top teams in terms of economic viability. So they're looking around and saying, well, the model's kind of broken now anyway. If anything, we need more sort of egalitarian structures to reinforce what we have. And so this is the tension. And the way it has worked out is, in fact, that the Champions League announced that they were changing their structure starting in 2024 in a way that is more beneficial to some degree to the bigger clubs. Now,
how is it more beneficial?
So what they're doing is they're switching to a 36-team structure with what's called a Swiss style.
Swiss style tournament. Yeah.
Right, with a Swiss tournament, which means that there are more games between big teams against each other.
Right.
Which in theory is supposed to bring in more revenue, generate more interest, more attention. Whether that is the case or not will remain to be seen. That is certainly what these big teams believe, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong. So they already sort of like forced through UEFA to make these changes to the Champions League to sort of make them be more prominent. And then they basically decided that wasn't enough. We're going to push for the Super League.
So is that just pure greed? Like, it feels like, okay, if UEFA is pushing this through with the big clubs in mind and everyone making more money in mind, like, how corrupt are UEFA that the big teams feel like we need to completely detach ourselves from everything they're doing, not work with them at all? You know?
There's two questions. One is, like, UEFA and FIFA are sportocrats, right? Like there's not there's no angels on either side of this here. But what is going on with the big clubs, and I think this is really driven by like Florentino Perez and Agnelli, who's the chairman of Juventus, is they actually say that, like, look, the pandemic has destroyed our finances. Our finances were always kind of on a knife edge, and we need this money now. And a big part of the pitch that they made was actually, we're going to sell these TV rights for a lot of money for like 10, 20, 25 years. We will take a loan out right now against those TV rights through JP Morgan Chase and put money in all of our pockets right now to plug the pandemic holes.
Right.
So that is a major part of the selling point. I think also it's important to like keep in mind that we are sort of at the end of a period of time where TV rights were going up exponentially, and now they're starting to plateau. And I think what a lot of these teams see is not like, okay, the pie is not expanding anymore. And if the pie is not continuing to expand, in order for our revenues and our growth to continue to expand, we need to much more urgently figure out a way to get a bigger slice of the pie. Right. And so that's what, you put all of that together right now, right? Like Champions League about to announce the change to the format. And then on top of that, a year of COVID. And then on top of that, some of these teams have been pushing it for a while anyway. And that's what gives you this sort of this weekend, this insane weekend where like a handful of teams say on Friday, we're going, get on board or not. By Sunday morning, you've got 12 teams they announce, and then it doesn't get there. And by Tuesday, it's dead.
It sort of seems like a lot of this stems from, the battle between like what the supporters demand from the owners of their clubs and what is actually realistic financially for the clubs. Whereas like, supporters want, okay, you always have to spend the most money in the transfer window. You always have to get the best players. We always have to be competing for the leagues and blah, blah, blah. And the owners are just like, we can't do that at this sustainable rate.
I think that that's true. And I do think that that's how fans react a lot. I was pleasantly surprised at the universal condemnation of this from fans. Because on some level, if you think about it, like, this is not a bad deal for Spurs and Arsenal, for example, to like get to tag along into this league. Right. And like their fans were having none of it. And like I think that is really like that's praiseworthy. Like there really is a sense here that like going from the Champions League to that is a different animal, and we don't want it. Now, like, look, I don't think that fan opposition to this alone would have stopped it. Right. Because I think what we need to remember here is that in addition to fans, this really was a sportocrat battle between FIFA and UEFA on one hand and these owners on the other.
Right.
No, not just FIFA and UEFA and all of the domestic
leagues, yeah.
right? Like, and all of the other, like, and so, yes, it is very important that fans unanimously lined up on one side of this battle. That makes a big difference. But if it was, like, just purely owners versus fans, I don't know that the same outcome comes out, right?
It seems nice. Oh, the owners listened to the supporters, and we won the war.
Right,
but
it's a great story to tell, and I expect that that's sort of how we're all gonna like eulogize it as we go along.
Right,
but it is a more complex story than that. Yeah.
But then the flip side, and more what I was trying to say, is that now, like the funny sort of dark fallout from some of it after the fans won and whatever was, okay, now they better go spend some money in the transfer window to make up for this. Now they better go buy best player.
That is the real problem. So that is the reason I was pleasantly surprised by the solidarity in the face of the Super League, because that impulse didn't show up, and that impulse always shows up, right?
Always.
Like always, because it is true that lots of fans just sort of think about like, I want to go to the stadium or watch my team on TV, and I want them to win. And, like, I don't want things to change, but I also want them to win. And, like, those two, like, ideas are often incompatible.
Right.
But most of the time, we don't have to think about it, right? Like, most of the time, we can just, like, focus on our team winning and not worry about everything else.
Right.
And you do then have exactly these impulses where it's like, well, if you want to make up to us the fact that you tried to do stuff to make more money, you need to spend more money. And like, obviously that's incoherent.
It's
like,
so backwards. It's so backwards.
It is a major reason that sports were so ripe for this sort of shift in ownership that we've seen, is that what fandom is a lot of teams, like a lot of people who want to like watch their team win and have fun.
Yeah.
And like, there's a reason that it is a target for like sports washing for like sovereign nations, right?
Yeah.
And there's a reason why like rich billionaires look at it and say, we can make money off of this, right?
Right.
That's what fandom is. That's what fandom sort of invariably leads to. Even for people who really self-consciously like believe that they want the quote-unquote right thing for the soccer world, don't want a Super League, all of this stuff. Like, it's very rare that you reach a point where we're like, yes, it is worth it for my team to lose more for that to not happen.
It feels like it'll never cross that line, right?
I mean,
it's always
it happened for 2 days. It happened the Monday and the Tuesday after the Super League were announced.
Yeah.
It's the only 2 days of my life I've ever seen it. I don't know if I will ever see it again, but it happened for 2 days.
Right. Yeah, and it becomes a question of what amount of greed in the sport that we love is okay and acceptable, and for how long can we?
It's like, tough, right? Because like you look at an ownership group like Fenway Sports Group, who own Liverpool, right?
Yep.
And they have by and large been great competitively for Liverpool, right?
Yep.
They've won their team well. They've turned that team into a bigger revenue machine so they can spend more. They spend it incredibly intelligently because they are very diligent about it.
Mm-hmm.
They've built this team. Like, you couldn't ask for anything more from that perspective.
Absolutely.
And then like years ago, they like flirted with raising ticket prices, got pushed back, and then like didn't do it.
Yep.
And they are reportedly one of the biggest agitators for this Super League jump, right? Like, there is no way to separate out the good parts of FSG from the bad parts. Either you end up creating a soccer world which is not enticing for these billionaire investors to come into, or you are like always going to be pushing back against them trying to like increase their revenue edge and the value of their investment.
It's complicated. People just want to complain also. I think it's like part of it. Like, they want that war. They want that drama almost.
I mean, yeah, I think that there is a lot of that as well. Look, I mean, it is the rare fan who is like, yeah, I'll be happier losing in a better system. And like, I don't begrudge fans that, right? Like, that's not why they come into sport. They come into fandom to like I mean, there are a lot of different reasons fans become fans.
Unless Jose Mourinho's your manager, I haven't heard of a team that's like, I want to lose.
Yes, that is But
correct. That has happened at his last two clubs.
I mean, and like the flip side of that is, in closed systems, it's not like owners don't exploit that, right? Like plenty of owners sell hope in American sports by saying we're going to lose now to be good later.
Yeah.
And we're going to not spend money now, but you should like that plan because we are doing it in the service of being good later. And sometimes it's true.
Smart.
Right. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
But that's what they're selling. They're selling that hope. And, in European sports, that hope is the pyramid, right? Like that hope is, sure, things may be bleak, but one day look at, pick your team that went all the way up, right?
So talking about the promotion and relegation, I agree with you. I think that was a large part of the pushback of just like the permanence of the teams in the Super League. Do you think, I mean, they're going to try again eventually. Do you think that it could have gone through, it could have succeeded if there was some sort of promotion relegation? Like, was that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thing?
Like, I think this was close, right? Like, I went to bed the Sunday night of the announcement thinking this was going to happen.
Yeah.
I had, there was reporting that Bayern Munich and one other team were on the precipice of joining. And if that had
everyone
happened,
thought PSG probably, right?
Eventually, right? Yeah. And if that happens, like, and then I wake up Monday morning and the statements are that like Bayern and Dortmund and RB Leipzig have all forcefully rejected this. PSG forcefully rejects this, and then the tide turns.
Right.
So it was close. Do I think a structure that was more open had a chance at succeeding? Probably. But I think that's really, like, structurally, that's hard to do. To me, like, I am probably more Super League curious in some form than many fans, because I really do think that the existing structures of domestic soccer have like large problems. Like the imbalances.
Well, what are those problems? Yeah, go into that for a sec.
The difference between Barcelona and Real Madrid and the bottom of La Liga, the differences between Juventus and the bottom of Serie A, much more so than in England, are massive. Just absolutely massive, to the point where these teams are not competitive with each other. In the Champions League, you have a structure right now that takes 32 teams, expanding to 36, that isn't close to the best 32 or 36 teams. It's like the best 12 teams, and then next
representation,
right? And like that is good for the representation of those other teams. Yeah. It is not good for the competitiveness of the tournament at the beginning of the tournament, right? Right. Like it is just one thing that I sort of track year to year in the Champions League is how many teams from the big four leagues plus PSG advance to the knockout stages out of the amount that could. Like sometimes you'll have 3 teams from those leagues in one group and only 2 teams can advance. Right. But like usually there is only 1 or 2 teams from that group that don't advance. Yeah. This year it was none. Every single team that could possibly advance from the big leagues and PSG advanced. Right. You Manchester United get knocked out because there were RB Leipzig and PSG in the group. But like, and so it really isn't great for the competitiveness of the group stages that things are structured this way. And so when you have that divide, I do think you should be open to trying to figure out, like, how do we make that better? And like the obvious answer is just like higher revenue sharing, right? Like both via the Champions League and UEFA, like sending more money to small leagues, but also within leagues redistributing, revenue from the richer teams to the poor teams, like we do in American sports. Like you can do that and still have an open system. But like, if you assume that owners will not be open to that, and let's be honest, most owners are not open to revenue sharing.
It's like the floodgates are too wide open for too long for them to backpedal on that.
Then you start having to think about, okay, structurally, can we do things differently? And like, it's not immediately apparent to me that you couldn't have all of the domestic leagues filter into a European league on top of it. Not a cup competition like the Champions League, but literally a domestic league that the best teams from the European competitions get promoted into.
Right.
Like, and if you did that, would that work? Maybe, but you'd need promotion and relegation. And part of what the biggest clubs, the ones that are agitating for change, really believe in is getting themselves insulated from the risk of ever getting relegated or missing a tournament in their life.
Which
right?
is
like,
purely because they just want to protect their investments.
Absolutely.
Right? There's nothing else to that.
You know, on the one hand, maybe you're Manchester United and you're Liverpool, who are like not in the Champions League spots right now, and it's a little fluky. And you say, okay, look, it's not a huge difference. We qualify almost every year anyway.
Yeah.
But like, look at AC Milan, right? AC Milan are like not a Champions League team. They may qualify this year; they're on the cusp, but like haven't been in the Champions League for years.
Yeah.
Spurs and Arsenal are not close to the top four right now in England. And what they are basically saying is we have a right to be present in that big competition because we are famous. And that's just a different thing, man. It's just like different from the way the world works now.
It's funny that their pitch is like, we are going to have all the best teams, so you get to see the best teams against the best teams every week. And then they allow in like Spurs, Arsenal, like Porto was in the mix and stuff. And it's like, well, what's the difference between, you know, like City, Dortmund in the quarterfinals and City versus Spurs? You know, it's
absolutely, that is absolutely right. Now, like what they will say to you is like, look, we are the teams that people want to watch.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, that's true. To a certain extent. But that's just a different thing than being the best teams, right?
Very different.
And so if you're going to look at this and say, yeah, there are real imbalances in the way it works now, and we maybe want a system that like unites the best teams against the best teams, that, you know, like Juventus and Liverpool are much more structurally similar to each other now than Juventus and Sassuolo or Liverpool and Burnley.
Right.
Okay, I can understand that argument.
Makes
but
sense.
The structures that imply, promotion and relegation, maintained competitive risk, are not the structures that are precisely the structures that the owners of these teams are driving changes to avoid.
Yes.
So that's the major issue there, I think.
Jeez. It's so complicated. So we basically covered why, who, what, where, why. Yeah. So what actually happened to it? How did it crash so quickly, so spectacularly?
So we have these 12 teams announced on Sunday. It looks like more are going to jump on board.
Yeah.
By Monday, we have announcements from Bayern and Leipzig and Dortmund and PSG, and then like a whole bunch of other secondary teams like Sevilla, teams like Porto, saying we want no part of this.
Right.
We have announcements from FIFA and UEFA saying we will expel teams from our competitions if they join this. Right. We have them threatening to like keep players from playing in World Cups and Euros if they play.
So insane.
The legality of that is way up in the air. I mean, I think the thing to take away from this is that the groups that were opposed to this recognized this as a giant threat, and they threw everything they had at it to stop it from happening. And then you've got a game on Monday afternoon. There's a Liverpool match.
Tell me about it.
Right, the players and the coaches start getting asked these questions. You had a game on Sunday where Thomas Tuchel gets asked about it.
Yeah.
Or at a pregame press conference, I think. Because, you know, the owners haven't said anything publicly. Like they've released like a statement and then nothing. So who gets asked? The players, the owners, and the players and the owners like, well, we like similar to fans, right? They have the same perspective about it. They don't like it, and they say it pretty clearly.
Yeah.
You know, James Milner just comes out after the Liverpool match when he's asked about it and says, I don't like it. I don't want it to happen.
Like, I feel like he was the first from the teams involved to just be like straight matter of fact, this is bad.
Okay, and so now you've got real opposition to this rule.
Yeah.
And you know, there's along lots of different axes, there's a lot of different solidarity. Jordan Henderson, calls a meeting of the team captains in the Premier League to like get on board opposing this. Right. And then top to bottom, every team who is not in this doesn't want to be in this. By Tuesday, you have protests outside Stamford Bridge where Chelsea are having a home game. And then sort of in the lead up there, Peter Cech is actually out like negotiating with the fans, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And as this is going on, Chelsea announced that they are going to, or leak, they don't make an official announcement. They make it known, they leak that they are going to withdraw. They're preparing to withdraw.
Which, side note, I was curious what, like, Chelsea and Man City were about to play in the semifinals of the Champions League. I wonder how much that affected them pulling out.
And Real Madrid. And I think
Real Madrid, right.
So UEFA was threatening to kick them out. I think legally they probably wouldn't. Even if ultimately they had the legal power to do that, which is a question mark, the legal issue of whether they had the power to do that would not have been resolved by the time those games kicked off. Right. So even though you had members of the UEFA's executive committee saying publicly we're going to do this, I think sort of in the cold light of day, probably those matches would have gone on.
Not realistic,
but you know, the other thing about specifically Chelsea and Manchester City, as it turns out, is like, they were sort of told on Friday, we're doing this, you can either jump on board or not. And
so insane.
And both of them sort of looked at it and said, well, like, if the train is leaving the station, we can't get left behind, and jumped on board.
Right.
But for their own reasons, this plan is not as crucially important to their ownership as it is to other owners.
Why is that?
So neither Roman Abramovich at Chelsea nor the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the United Arab Emirates,
I can't,
which owns Manchester City, is in this for profit reasons primarily. Profits are nice, making money is nice, but there are other benefits to them for owning teams. Same with PSG, right? So who didn't jump on board? Although the PSG are owned by Qatar, and Abu Dhabi, UAE are not on the best of terms as nations, so it gets complicated fast.
And PSG has UEFA connections as
well.
Right.
So yes, that is correct. They have sort of chosen to ingrain themselves in the fabric of UEFA's governance of European soccer in ways that Manchester City's owners had not.
Right.
But so for those reasons, right, like both City and Chelsea were not nearly as invested in this plan going through. Right. So once you get this serious amount of blowback, right? Once you really see, not only is there opposition, but there's like unified opposition to this. They quickly made the calculation that, okay, we're not going to that it's not worth it for us, right? That both the hurdles to it actually happening when we see how opposed everybody is to it, and the pain that they can inflict along the way, make it so the calculus for us is it just makes sense to mea culpa and withdraw.
Right.
And once that cracks, right, like once you have those two teams leave, then the writing is really on the wall. And the rest
infinite money is a hell of a drug.
Right? And that's exactly right. And like part of it is like, as much money as pretty much all of these owners might have, Abu Dhabi has more. Like that's just what it comes down. Manchester United is a publicly traded company that has like a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders.
Yes.
United Arab Emirates is a country.
Yeah.
Like it's a different
absurdly rich country.
Right. So once Chelsea sort of frame it as like both publicly and privately that they don't want all the other good work that they are committed to doing in the community to be overshadowed by this. Right. And to like Roman Abramovich and Chelsea's credit, for whatever else you justifiably want to say about them, they do invest in the community. They have initiatives. They've like been really invested in funding a women's team. Like they've built up the like geographically the stadium and the surrounding areas and invested in it. They've done all of these things. Whether you want to look at it cynically or not, they've done them. Yeah. And like, even if you want to look at it cynically, it makes sense that they wouldn't want all of that sort of stuff overshadowed by this other thing.
Totally makes sense.
Right. So they make that calculation, and City makes roughly a similar calculation, right? Like if you're the ruling family in Abu Dhabi and your point of owning Manchester City is to get people to like you, like you want people to root for Manchester City and have Manchester City win, and because Manchester City wins, they like the owners, and that happens to be, a country. Like getting significant blowback from this is contrary to your efforts in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so once they're gone, now you're down to 10 teams. Like, you've got like pretty much everybody who would make up the next 5 in the permanent launch group.
Right.
It has said no. And then, like, you know, when you look at it realistically, well, okay, if we're launching a Super League, but it doesn't have PSG, Bayern Munich, Chelsea, Manchester City,
what the hell is it?
We are no longer the dominant force. We are like one of 2 competitors, and that does not make any sense for our economic model. Yeah. So then, like, you know,
and then there'll be another league that's the winner of the Super League versus the winner of the Champions. It's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, and like, this is another thing we've seen in American sports, that like competitive leagues don't work. One of them either folds or gets like, you know, the AFL and the NFL become the AFC and the NFC under the NFL. The ABA folds and some teams join the NBA. Like,
actually, all American sports, this has happened, right? Baseball too.
Exactly. Yeah. So you just won't have two separate entities that are long running, healthy, and successful.
Right.
And like the other English teams recognize this, and like they do have this Premier League gravy train that they don't want to mess up.
Right.
So Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal, and Spurs sort of shortly thereafter pull out. Once that happens, the Italian clubs more or less follow suit. There is some debate as to whether or not they have like officially withdrawn or just said like we recognize it's not happening. But like at that point, it's dead, and that's Tuesday night, right? By Tuesday night, they announced Sunday late. By Tuesday late, 48 hours later, it's dead.
So insane.
Yeah.
So what about the German teams? Like, where were they in all of this? Okay, because they're very much not PSG, but they had their own reasons for being so against it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things people point to. One is what's called the 50 plus 1 ownership rule, which keeps ownership decision-making to some degree in the hands of fans.
Okay.
And that is part of what was going on. It is certainly that ownership structure influences the German team ownership mentality in terms of their openness to doing stuff like this, right? But at the same time, there's also a different set of rules governing the Bundesliga, which would have made it legally harder for these clubs to pull out. And then, like, the thing to consider is that on top of this, right, Bayern Munich dominates the Bundesliga. If they don't join the group of 15 teams, the chances are they're going to qualify in one of those 5 spots pretty much every year anyway. Right. So cynically, the downside risk to them not joining, even if the thing gets off the ground, same for PSG, by the way, is not that high. And
I didn't even think of that because they got to look around and see what's happening first. So they can make the easy political decision of, hey, we're the good guys with basically no risk.
That is exactly right. Yeah. And like, to be like pretty clear here, PSG, as it turns out, become very opposed to this. Their owner, their head ends up like, now he's the head of the club, the European Club Association, which Agnelli had been but stepped down from. Right. And like ultimately becomes sort of like the right-hand man of the head of UEFA in sort of opposing this. But from Sunday into late Monday, radio silence, right? They didn't release a statement. They didn't say, they didn't enjoy it, but they didn't say anything else one way or the other.
So they were feeling it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I will say, we, on my podcast, on Double Pivot, we had Josh Robinson, who's a reporter for the Washington Post, for the Wall Street Journal on. And what he said to us, honestly, is that when Manchester City were making their decision, Manchester City looked around at who was on board and looked around at who was not on board, which included PSG, looked at that group of teams and said, those people are not our friends, and then joined. So you really do have this enmity between these two countries, which plays a role in this process.
It's so big.
It's big.
This whole thing is so big.
There's no way around it, right? That just like the biggest parts of world politics play in this, and like have to. There is no.
And it's like, is that right, and is that good, and does anyone actually want this? It's just like it's spiraling out of control almost.
This is the hardest thing, right? Is that you look at the wake of this, right? And like people like Arsenal fans, for example, are legitimately very, very mad at Stan Kroenke, their owner. They were before this, and they're even more so now. But you look at like, what's the other option? The other option is a billionaire who owns Spotify coming in and buying them. And like, is that better? No, not really. I mean, maybe you get a better Kroenke, right?
Right.
Maybe, but like a better Kroenke is FSG, who own Liverpool,
right?
And
who
they were
the
like
Super League.
gung ho about a Super League. So like, how you get from here to a world where these kinds of pressures aren't leading in this direction is really hard.
Right. But the ideal ownership from the supporters' perspective just doesn't exist. Like there's no billionaire good guy.
Look, Roman Abramovich is pretty freaking close, right?
Yeah, I guess that's what everyone kind of wants.
But what has happened is,
even if they don't admit it,
it used to be that the clubs were locally big, and you would have sort of local businessmen run them for bragging rights, basically, and be willing to lose various amounts of money to do that.
Right.
There were,
like Josh said on your podcast, they didn't even take salaries until the 80s. Which is mind-blowing.
There were bad things about that model. I want to be clear that like you don't want to like super romanticize the past, but the bad things about that model. There were different bad things than the bad things about the model we have currently. And so once this becomes a big business, and the reason we had Josh on is he wrote a great book about the founding of the Premier League.
Yeah, I need to read that.
It's called The Club. And that moment when all of a sudden this becomes big business, now the big clubs are just too big to be run by a guy who's happy to own them and lose money for them, because people can't lose that much money.
Yeah.
And it's like there are not very many Roman Abramoviches in the world.
Right.
And so like the values of these, of these clubs in the billions of dollars is like, well, yeah, you're looking at sovereign wealth funds, right? Like that's you're looking at sovereign wealth funds and hedge fund investors. And like those are not the groups that are going to lead you away from this path.
Right. Yeah, you guys brought that up, right? Those valuations of the clubs at this point are like almost made up numbers. It's like,
I mean, they're made up, right? Like
it's like when Messi gets rumored around every summer, and it's like, well, no one can pay his wages except Manchester City.
Well,
so,
now we have two teams that are sort of reliably reported to be in the group. It's Manchester City and it's PSG, the two teams owned by countries.
So all of these rumors are ridiculous because it's just not even feasible. Yeah, it's just
So like the answer in a lot of ways is there was so much uproar that I don't think you're going to see a super league of that variety tried again for a while. But it does seem possible that just sort of like slowly and gradually the Champions League will become more exclusive and more friendly to keeping big teams in it. And the ladder up the pyramid just gets narrower and narrower as the years go by.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to go, I guess, as we're like nearing the end of the podcast. It's just like, where do we go next? Because all of these teams are still just as unhappy as they were before the Super League announcement, right? Like nothing has changed for them, and they're in massive debt, and what are they going to do now?
Right. So there's a couple of different like sort of blueprints for some of these teams.
Yeah.
Some teams wanted to do this to increase their revenue. Some teams like hopped on board because they didn't want to get left behind. Some teams need the money, right? Those are three different groups.
Right.
Like it's not clear that Liverpool need a whole cold hard cash infusion now to keep their club afloat. It's not clear that Barcelona don't need that. These are teams in different economic areas, and we're really not sure who's who here.
But it's also the other side of that is Liverpool might feel like they need the cash infusion to compete with Manchester City every year.
Yeah, that's true. But like for them, so like maybe what happens is like they have a couple of down years, right? Like
right.
It is an issue that like it's an issue in a couple of ways. Like, they were looking to buy players. They were also like, if you talk to people who report on the club, I think one thing that they sort of, the way they had planned out the team for the next several years is like, well, at this point, okay, we sell one of our big stars to Real Madrid or whoever, get a lot of money, and use that to turn the talent of the team over and reinforce the areas that are getting old. Well, if Real Madrid don't have the money, now Liverpool can't do that, and that has repercussions. So there are going to be a lot of repercussions in the transfer market in the immediate sense.
Right.
I think that it is possible that like UEFA will arrange a loan of some sort of the variety that the Super League was looking into. That has been reported as something that may be on the table. Again, it's not clear which teams really need it, which teams want it, and which teams don't even want it. Right. But so that's part of it. I do think the most likely path is the sort of slow evolution of the Champions League to, be more friendly, even more friendly to big teams. The continued dominance of the Premier League, which is clearly the most resilient economic league that we have right now, whose rights go for more than, and like a little bit of a shift where Barcelona and Real Madrid, especially if Messi leaves Barcelona, are somewhat less powerful competitively as clubs. PSG is somewhat more powerful competitively as club. And a lot of these middle clubs are in trouble, right? But they were going to be in trouble either way, which means that I think that there's a lot of uncertainty even apart from the Super League. And the Super League, the attempt and failure, if you were a big club that didn't want to spend money anyway, you're just going to tell your fans, look, we tried to do a Super League so we could spend money for you, and now we can't. And if that's the case, then it's going to lead to more tension between owners and fans. But at the same time, like, these owners show no inclination that they want to leave. And kind of, why would they?
Right. Yeah, because they're making money hand over fist just by being in the Premier League.
That's especially for these Premier League clubs. They are profitable enterprises,
right?
And the owners want to own them because they are profitable. Is not the right word. Valuable is the right word, because some of them are like pretty close cash, like sort of revenue and expenditure wise, but they've all been increasing in value. So they don't particularly care if the fans hate them.
Right?
Like, it doesn't matter to them.
Right. Like, Kroenke doesn't care. Mike Ashley doesn't care.
Mike Ashley's a great example. He doesn't care, and he's not part of these super rich ones, right?
Yeah, he just wants to finish 17th every year, and he's good to go.
That is the most successful outcome for Newcastle. Clearly, in his opinion,
Right, and then the thing with the domestic leagues also is that, like you're saying, the middle tier teams are in trouble either way. If the Super League went through, the entire domestic league would just fall apart, probably. They would get strangled out of existence in a lot of real ways. The status quo, they're just getting further and further from the big clubs as is. It's... In England, that's not necessarily the case. Well, not this season, especially. Yeah, and just in general, because the TV rights are so big that they've given them a lot of cushion. Yeah. But, the problem in Spain and in Italy and in France is a year without fans has just crushed the finances of these middle class teams who really rely on game day revenue a lot more for a lot more of a percentage of their budget. Right. And they are many. We saw Schalke in Germany just totally imploded. Right. You look at France, Lille is having one of their best seasons in a generation, and also may have to sell 2/3 of their players at the end of the season because they just can't afford, they can barely afford to be a club right now. And so there does need to be some form of bridge financing, I think, to sort of get Europe over the hump. That just the Super League, no matter what they said, was not that, right? It wasn't that. But so are you basically saying if the COVID season hadn't happened, do you think the teams would have still been on track to propose some sort of Super League? Or did the COVID season accelerate it? Yeah, that is, I think, sort of what this comes down to, right? Yeah. Which is that all of these teams have wanted a bigger slice of the pie for a long time.
And sort of like every time the window comes up to renegotiate UEFA TV rights, they like threaten to leave if changes aren't made.
Right.
But they've never been like super serious about it before.
Right.
And I think what happens is because of the year of COVID, because finances really are more difficult than they have been. What you see is there was more of a willingness to try to push this through now because of it. It doesn't, but like the fact that it failed and that COVID will eventually be in a rearview mirror doesn't mean that the pressures that existed before it that were pushing us in this direction are gone. They're still there. I do really think that, yes, a big part of the inciting incident was the last year.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, once, like, they've been invincible for so long and they tasted mortality with the COVID season and they're like, this can't ever happen again.
I mean, that is exactly right? You know, it is, as I was saying, it's a little bit hard to tell who is like, oh my God, COVID almost destroyed this club. And who is like, oh my God, COVID almost made us not turn a profit for 2 years. Right. And there is a big difference between those two ideas.
Big difference.
But it is not clear which clubs fall in which category. But yes, both of those things kind of were going on here.
And since all of these billionaires are like meeting in secret, it's, you know, like Perez can be like, he can essentially like fear monger the other owners to be like, look what's happening to us, and we're Real Madrid, you know.
And Real Madrid is on the one hand saying that like we're going to fail, and on the other hand saying we're going to buy Erling Haaland. And like you cannot have it both ways, but like that is what Perez does. Florentino Perez wants to have it both ways, and everybody listens to Florentino Perez. So.
Oh boy, a lot of action, So I'm gonna read the club. I guess I'll try and follow up. I'll follow your tweets and all that stuff. Where can people read your work, hear you speak, follow you on social media, all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm at the M_L_G on Twitter. Most of my work now is there's the podcast, Double Pivot Podcast with me and Michael Kelly. You can find us on Patreon, and you know wherever you get your podcasts. And then, like, I'm at CBS Soccer, where I do a little bit of writing, but mostly I'm doing a lot of editing, and we've got a great team there. We cover the Champions League really extensively because, like, we have the rights to it. So, like, this was, let me tell you, apart from, for me personally as the protagonist of reality, it was a very stressful couple of days.
Jeez, on the semifinal wasn't enough work. Here's the Super League.
I mean, ultimately, it ended in the Goodman sweet spot, which was like, there was a ton of interest in the story, so we got a ton of traffic for people wanting to read about it, and also our rights are still very valuable, so like there's still a reason for me to be employed there. But yeah, you can find, like, I'm real proud of the work we're doing at CBSSports.com, and like lots of writers doing lots of good work.
Thank you so much for coming on. Glad we were able to do this.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Check us out, FMLPL.com. Follow us on Twitter at FMLPL. Support us at Patreon.com/FMLPL. Subscribe, rate, review, and cheers.